All right. Sorry I'm late. Had a bit of technical difficulty. Graphics card quit on me. So, okay. So in this live stream, I want to talk about a new tool that I've been working on. I mean, it's not new. I've been working on it for quite a while, but I've made a lot of progress lately, and so I wanted to talk about my experience building a pretty robust web app. This is probably something that I've spent more time on than almost any of my other tools, aside from the Chrome extension here. This one it took a long time to build, but that was partly because I just didn't know how to build things. I was just starting out with coding with AI, and this was the first thing that I really built. So this took me a while just because I was learning how to do it, kind of learning the ropes. I think if I were doing this again now, it would not take me nearly as long. But at the time, it took quite a while to build this out. But now that I know what I'm doing, I know the ropes, it doesn't take me nearly as long to build out a tool. So, for example, all these web tools that I built on my website, I've been building them faster and faster. The last 4 of these I think I've built in the last month, and the rest of these took a year or 2. So I'm just kind of speeding up with the speed at which I can output web tools, and just learning how to do it, and learning how to work with large language models. And then also, of course, the quality of the models is improving, and their ability to produce code is better than it's ever been. So a few factors are equaling out to it's taking less time to build these types of apps. However, this one here, this has been a huge process. So let me go back to the beginning and tell you kind of why I built this and what it is, and the whole thought process behind building a pretty complex web application. So what this is, I'll show you here. I'll upload a file. It is a audio editing tool. Specifically, it's for reducing noise in a piece of audio. This main screen here is what's called a 3D spectral frequency display, and it's just a way of looking at audio that is a lot more detailed than any other way of looking at audio. It's pretty complex, like what goes into creating this visualization, but essentially so I'll lay it out here the way that you usually are looking at a spectral frequency display, which is the lower bass tones are the lower frequencies are at the bottom, the higher frequencies are at the top, and the mid frequencies, of course, in the middle of the spectral display. This is how it's usually viewed when it's not three-dimensional. Usually it's 2-dimensional, and it looks kind of like this. But in this case, it's 3-dimensional, and the parts that are louder are closer to us in this top view. If we were to kind of spin this around, now the loud parts are higher up vertically for us, and the higher pitch frequencies are up here on the left-hand side. The lower frequencies are on the right-hand side. So anyway, you can move this around, and really what's happening is we're moving the camera around, and I know it looks like we're moving this, but the way this works on the coding side is we're moving the camera around. So we're spinning around and looking at this from different angles. And what's useful about that is you can look in here and see, if you know that higher up is louder, higher amplitude, and lower down is quieter, then all the stuff down here toward the bottom is quieter and the stuff up here at the top is louder. You know that if we're looking at it from the way that we would traditionally look at a spectral display, on the left is the beginning of the audio. On the right, toward the right, is the end of the audio. So this would be look like kind of like a timeline, from going from left to right. So this middle part is the middle part of the audio. So the reason that I point that out is because if we're actually listening to the audio, if we want to know what this part in the middle sounds like, we can just move the playhead of the player over to that section and play the audio. And I don't think you're able to hear that on your end. I have it turned off, but essentially we can look around and find something that we want to edit and move the playhead to that location, and we have a much clearer way of looking at what we're listening to. The cool part about this is actually when you get really deep into editing audio, which I used to do, and I still do for fun, but I used to as a job. I worked for a radio station. When you get really deep into it, and you're just trying to go fast and edit a lot of audio quickly, it's often faster, and you can do a better job sometimes just looking at the audio rather than listening to it. Sometimes you need to listen back to it just to make sure that it sounds how you think it does, but a lot of times you can get a sense of how it sounds just by looking at it. Like, for example, with this piece of audio here, with all this this stuff here at the bottom, I know that appears, or that the way that sounds is, it sounds like noise, like white noise, like static. So when you're seeing kind of like a flattish area, but still something there, that's typically going to come across as noise or static. So like TV static type of sound. So if I want to get rid of that, well, I can see like all these flat areas I don't want anymore. Well, that's what this tool is for. I built it specifically for that. There's these 3 sliders right here where you can move up this red area, and what that does is that sets what's called a noise floor, where we can tell the system anything below that we want to remove. So that way we can kind of like raise us up like floodwaters or something, and anything below it we can tell the system that we don't want anymore. So that's what this does, is it'll delete or reduce the amplitude of anything below that red area. So if I hit process audio right now, and by the way, if you want to use this tool, it's at noisefixer.com. It's free to use. You don't have to have an account or anything. So now if we look at the output, which the system has, or this app has jumped us over to the output view, we now see that most of that audio has been reduced in amplitude. So if we go back to the input here, and let me just reduce or lower the red area so that it's not distracting. And if we flip back and forth here, we can see this area is higher. Now there's still some that we might want to reduce. So if we go back here, we can lift up that noise floor a little bit higher and do a better job of reducing that if we want to. So anyway, that's what this tool is for, is to give you a sense of what it is that you're doing to the audio, and let you really get in there and get a close eye on exactly what you're editing and how it's going to be impacted when you use this noise floor. There's a few other options here, but essentially that's what it's for. So anyway, what I want to talk about on this live stream is not just this tool, but my thought process in building it and some of the trials and tribulations that I went through in trying to create something like this. When I first started building it, I think I started on ChatGPT, and I ran into some trouble early on because I just didn't know the first thing about how to do this. And so I was trying to get ChatGPT to build it without really knowing what I was doing. And I was just, I would go to ChatGPT and I would just put in a prompt like, build a web app that lets me see audio in 3D and see the noise floor and let me edit it and remove the noise. It was something like that. And there's nothing wrong with starting like that, but the problem is there's so much that goes into building something this complex that ChatGPT is not built to just jump in. It's going to try to do the kind of the easiest job possible to create something that works for you, but doesn't necessarily go as in-depth as you want to. And so the problem that I had was, I'd build something and then I'd try it out and it didn't quite work and it wasn't exactly what I wanted, and I just kept iterating and finally I got tired of using ChatGPT, and I heard about this this platform called Bolt. So bolt.new, and Bolt has it's similar in that you can code with it, but it's got the benefit of also having a back-end database. Like, you have access to a back-end database, so you can build out an entire platform, not just a front-end web app. And if you're new to coding, if you're new to building websites and platforms, you may not know what that means, but essentially the difference between a front-end application and a back-end application, for the average person, it means that when you're using the application, you can save stuff and come back to it later and like refresh the page, and that web app has saved what you left there. All of the applications that I build, these are all front-end applications, which means if you refresh the page, it'll forget everything that you put in there and you're starting fresh. So that's one of the limitations of a front-end web app, is that it forgets everything. Another limitation of a front-end web app, especially one that's built on a blog like mine, where I just literally paste the code into my blog, and that's it. That's the entirety of this application, is just code that I pasted into a blog post. Well, another limitation of that is it's only accessing the code that I pasted in there. Well, with one caveat, it does have access to third-party CDNs, which is essentially like code that somebody else has hosted somewhere else on the internet. You can have a web app that accesses that, and in fact, if I I don't know the easy way to show you this, but this application is using CDNs, and a few of my applications are, which means when you load the page, it's it's reaching out to that third party, pulling in all the code, and building out the application as you load the page. But that's it. If you have other code that you want to use to like for other functionality, you're just limited to what's on the page or hosted elsewhere. But the benefit of a self-hosted platform and with a backend, like what you can build with bolt.new, and there's another one called Lovable. Lovable.dev is another one that's like that, where you can build out a backend database. The benefits of those is that you can host that code on your site, and so the entire application can be hosted on your site. There's other benefits too, like you can integrate payment systems, you can integrate login systems where you can have users log in. There's a lot of benefits to having a backend server where you can build out a much more robust platform. But there are downsides to it too. And so as I was testing out like how to build this thing, what I found out was that some of the downsides are that these platforms, because they're built to be a lot more robust, they're going to build a much larger platform than you may need. So you're going to spend a lot of time and energy and actually money if you sign up for an account with one of these, a paid account. It's going to cost you money to build out an application that usually you're spending a lot of that on just fixing errors and removing stuff that you didn't mean to build and trying to go back to something simpler. These are built to create a large platform, and that's kind of like a mixed bag, because on the one hand, that's kind of cool to have a big platform, but on the other hand, it's constantly building things that you didn't want. It's constantly creating new errors and then costing you money to fix them, because each new prompt effectively costs you money. And with ChatGPT, it's much less so. It's much easier to build on here without costing yourself a lot of money. Now, I have a paid account with ChatGPT. It's $20 a month, but that's a lot cheaper than some of these other platforms. Well, I mean, you can have a lower price tier on these platforms, but you're just going to have a lot less. You're going to run out of prompts pretty quickly. With ChatGPT, that's not the case anymore. It was the case for a while where you'd run out of prompts, but pretty much now you don't run into that. At least I don't. I haven't run into it. So you're costing yourself a lot of money. You're building something that is bigger than what you want, and you're spending a lot of your time fixing errors. That is my experience with using these larger platforms. That's not to say that you shouldn't use them, but in my experience, when you're first starting out trying to build something, it's going to be a lot more worth your time to spend your energy just building a front-end application. That's what I highly recommend. This entire application is all front-end. It's all just code that I pasted into a blog. And it's very complex. I mean, it's got a lot of code in there. It's doing a lot of things. And one of the benefits to doing it that way is that I was forced to find really efficient ways of making this work, using the browser itself. The browser has like APIs that you can integrate, using like new ways of processing audio. Like it forced me to learn a lot more, and it forced me to just do a better job of creating a tool that's a lot more lightweight and really a better tool than I was building when I was trying to do it on these platforms like Lovable and Bolt. And I wasted months trying to do it on these larger platforms, and I was never able to quite get it there. So even though I was spending more time, more money on a bigger, supposedly better platform, ultimately I failed at creating what I wanted, and it was a lot more clunky and complex and just a heavy weight of an application than it needed to be. I could now take this entire code base, this entire thing that's built out here. In fact, if I go to my code pin, I'll show you this entire, all the code that runs this web app is in my code pin. So if I go over here, those are a bunch of other versions of it. All of it is right here. And this is what I was talking about, where it's pulling in those CDN links. These are JavaScript that's hosted elsewhere. And theoretically, I could just dump all of this JavaScript onto my page. It wouldn't be a super efficient way of doing it, but that's one alternative. I could just put that on the same page like I did with this web app. I could just paste the code in there and it could access it. But ultimately, at some point, it will be a good idea to build out this thing on a larger platform and integrate these libraries, these JavaScript libraries, instead of pulling them in from a CDN. But anyway, all the code other than those CDN links is all right here. And I could just copy and paste this into a prompt with one of these platforms and build out this entire web app in one of those platforms, and then integrate it with a back-end server at that point. So now that I've actually built this and did it all for free pretty much on ChatGPT, and I used Perplexity and Grok as well, and also actually I had a lot of luck with Gemini's models as well. But going back and forth between the different models, if I'd run into a situation where a model kept coming up with the same error, I would just move over to another model and copy the code and paste it in there and ask another question. And that's how I would get unstuck. So moving it back and forth between the different models and keeping it out of these larger platforms with backend databases, I was able to keep it lightweight and create eventually what I wanted to build and have it all in one piece of code right here that I can now take and move it around a lot easier. So I can copy this code, put it into ChatGPT and ask a question about it. I can move it on into Lovable and build out a backend database so I can have people log in, for example. I can do all of that now that I have the app built. So again, I highly recommend that. If you're building a platform, start with a front-end version. I mean, look at how many things I've built in the front end that are all web tools. You can build, you could essentially build almost anything as a front-end application and then add the server later. I've built a universal media converter. You can convert videos and audio, like convert that to a MP3 and save it on your computer. I did all this without, this one failed. So that's a bad example. But anyway, I've built a bunch of tools all with with just front end JavaScript and HTML. And I could take any one of these, take the entire code base and drop it into Lovable, Bolt, one of those other platforms, and build out a backend at some point if I want to. And I've built these more lightweight, faster loading. I've been forced to build these in a more efficient way that doesn't require a backend database. And so now if I do integrate a backend, it's going to be running more from the front end side, which means it's requiring less of the database, which means it costs you less money to run, and it's running more efficiently. It's running more locally to the person who's loading the website. So there's pretty much no downside to building things in the front end first. So I hate to beat a dead horse, but I just think it's so important that, and I've run into this so many times where I've repeatedly gone back to these platforms with high hopes, thinking, oh, I'm going to do it this time, and every time I get burned, where I run out of tokens, run out of prompts, and at some point I've just got to go back to ChatGPT or Gemini or one of the others, and with my tail between my legs, because I've just I'm tired of spending money on these more expensive platforms, and I just want something that works. So I think you'll be impressed what is possible to build on the front end if you just try it. Just try to build anything that you're trying to build. Start with front end first, and then take it to Lovable, Bolt, or one of those other platforms. Let's see. I think that's all I wanted to cover tonight. I'm going to keep this one fairly short. I just wanted to cover that because it's something that I've run into over and over and over. And now that I've finally succeeded in building this, I have no doubt that you will be successful in building whatever it is that you want to build on the front end first. Whether you think it's possible or not, I promise you it's possible to build whatever it is that you want to build on the front end. Now, there might be a point where you need to have a backend database, but for the most part, you can build out all the functionality, test out, even for example, I wanted to add one of the features on here. I wanted to add the feature, and I was having the hardest time adding the feature to the existing tool. Well, what I finally ended up doing was I created a new conversation with ChatGPT and Gemini. I tested out, I'm always testing out multiple models at a time, but I just started a new conversation about that one feature. And then once I had that feature working, I took that code, dropped it into a conversation about this platform or this tool, and asked Gemini to integrate that into this tool. So even when you have the tool that you've built, when you want to add a new feature, it's often better to just start a new conversation, build out a working prototype of that feature, and then once you have it working, then drop it into this, like the tool that you're building. So for example, I'm just going to go ahead and copy all this code. So again, this is the code of that same tool that I was just showing you. It's just in CodePen. But I'm going to copy all the code here and go into a conversation with ChatGPT, and I can say, or actually, let me do this with Gemini. ChatGPT has some trouble with really long prompts, so I'm just going to use Gemini for this because that code is fairly long. I will show you a tool or a trick in just a second, but you can just drop the code in here and you can say, build a tool based on the above concept that does X, whatever it is. Sorry. So if you want to add a feature to this tool, you can give ChatGPT or Gemini all of your code base and say, build out a tool based on this concept that does whatever that new feature is that you want to build. And sorry, once you have that new feature built, you can then come back to Gemini and say, add this feature, this new feature to this tool. So that way you don't have to constantly be like iterating with this giant code base every time. You can just start with a new little smaller piece of code, get that working and iterate, a few times, because there's always going to be iteration. There's always going to be some error that pops up, and so do all that iterating with a smaller code base, and then at some point bring that back. Now, I just mentioned that I was going to show you another trick here. So let's say that you want to have a conversation with ChatGPT about this code base, but it's too long and it keeps getting truncated. Like when you drop this into a conversation with ChatGPT, it says the code is too long or whatever. That often happens. So what you can do is you can copy the code and go to a JavaScript minifier, and let me drop this code in here. And now you have a shorter piece of code that you can take into ChatGPT and share that way. It's the same code, it's just a shorter minified version of it. So that's a way, another trick you can use. You can also minify CSS as well. And in fact, if you're working with Gemini or ChatGPT and you want to save some time, you can ask it to minify the JavaScript that it's producing as well, and it will be able to produce more JavaScript, a longer code, because it's using less tokens to do it. So that's another trick as well. Let's see, what else did I want to cover? Yeah, using lots of different models, building out your tool in these cheaper models before you go to these larger platforms. I feel like there was something else that I wanted to cover, but I think that was the gist of it. I think it's so surprising what you can build on the front end without needing a giant database in the back end. You can build it all out and then and test it out on like CodePen, for example, and you don't even have to have a website. You can try building out your code, see if it works, and then once you have something that works, feel free to take it into Lovable or Bolt or one of those other platforms and build out a backend for it at some point if you want to. But why waste all the time and energy and money when you don't have to? You can build something like this out. I think when I first started doing this kind of thing, I never would have thought that it was possible to build something this complex on the front end. I was trying to do it, but I as soon as I got into it, I was like, this is not going to work. I don't know what I'm doing here. It will work. You just got to take some time to learn a little bit. Oh yeah, that's the one more thing that I wanted to talk about. So as you're going about building these tools, one thing that you're going to run into is I got a few questions on here. Let's see. Video on Google Anti-Gravity. It's trending now. And you usually use ChatGPT for brainstorming. Yeah. I don't know if you've seen my other live streams. Thanks for your comments. But another way to brainstorm is using Notebook LM. Let me show you real quick. Let me pull up Notebook. Sorry, I know I'm a little bit delayed, but you'll see this in just a minute. So Notebook LM, if you haven't used it yet, is phenomenal for brainstorming. Now, if you already have, if you don't already have some idea of what you want to build, then you can just go find a certain target market, pull up Google and ask a question like, what web tool do people most often complain about on Reddit? And actually, instead of saying on Reddit, let's do site:/reddit.com. And what tools are you using to ensure you? So these are all Reddit threads that hopefully are about people complaining about different web tools. You could probably ask this a different way. You could put in a quote that you think people are probably saying about a certain web tool. You could say, web tool sucks. And it's going to come up with a bunch of Reddit threads where people are talking about that. There's another word you could use, like rant. And now you've got a bunch of ideas of tools that people are frustrated with that you might be able to create a better version of. But with Notebook LM, you can take all of these Reddit threads, and I'm just going to copy all these results. I'm going to go over to my website real quick and use a tool. You don't have to use mine, but just for reference, it's here if you want to. getmoredonefast.com, and then it's this tool, this URL grabber. So I just pasted that the results from Google, and it'll give me all those URLs. I can copy the URLs, and I can put those into Notebook LM right here, and it will import all of those threads. Sometimes it has trouble with certain Reddit threads and certain websites, so your results may vary. But anyway, it's importing all those threads, and at some point, once it's completed, I can ask a question about those threads. I can say, what are people saying? What are people complaining about most? Or what features do people wish tools had? So that's a great way of brainstorming, but also a great way of iterating once you've got an idea. Because, let's say that you want to build, like I just did. I built this noise fixer for me, but if you wanted to build a noise tool for other people, then maybe type in noise reduction tool, and then we'll leave rant on there. And now you've got a bunch of Reddit threads that you could put into a Notebook LM notebook and ask questions about that audience. So now you have like a specific target market that you can research and build out a tool specifically for them. When I'm building out tools on my website, I usually take some time to do that. Just to get ideas for how I might want to build it. I'm usually building things for me. These are all tools that I use. But even then, I still want to just do a little bit of research to see what's out there, what people are usually complaining about. And then you can also pull in all the documentation for a certain new platform or something. Like this conversion tool here. I built this out on a pretty recently developed library called Media Bunny. And most of the language models that I was talking with didn't know anything about that library. And so I pulled in all the documentation into a notebook, and then I could ask questions directly of that notebook. And it's nice, it put a little emoji there for us just to let us know. So yeah, so now we have, see, some of these didn't come in correctly. We can, doesn't matter, but we can remove these if we don't want to look at them. So now we can ask a question directly of that audience, like list 10 features everyone wishes web tools have, but they never do. So this is basically like doing market research where you're talking, they call it qualitative research, where you're talking with your audience. You can do a little bit of quantitative as well. Now, I wouldn't take it to the bank. These are, sometimes this model will hallucinate a little bit, but it's a good place to get ideas, and that's what you were talking about in the chat. So I don't know if you've used Notebook LM, but it's a super cool tool that I use constantly. I use Gemini a lot. I use Notebook LM a lot, and ChatGPT. I also use Perplexity. Perplexity is become a really good model for coding. They've got a couple different models here. I don't really understand what this labs model does. It's different than the research model. Both of them seem to have kind of similar functionality, but both of these are really powerful models. And even the base models that are available through Perplexity. Now, I do have a pro account, so I'm not sure that these are available for everyone, but they've got GPT 5.1, Gemini 3 Pro, Grok 4.1. They've got a few of these higher models, and with reasoning as well. So each of these have reasoning. Not all of them, but so Perplexity is a great tool as well. I do have a paid account with Perplexity. I have a paid account with Gemini and a paid account with ChatGPT, and I use all of them a lot. So I wouldn't recommend any one of them. I mean, I guess if you're only going to pay for one, I'd probably go with Gemini right now. It's pretty good with coding, and it's much less limited with its context. So you can drop a ton of text in there. Actually, let me say, I don't know, maybe Perplexity, because Perplexity, you have access to those other models as well. So if you're only going to pay for one, maybe Perplexity, because then it does have Gemini's model in there. It doesn't seem to be quite as good as the Gemini model through the Gemini interface, but it's still pretty good, and you have access to these other models. So maybe Perplexity if you're only going to pay for one. Anyway, oh yeah, the one other thing that I was going to talk about is, unfortunately, even though it's called vibe coding, you're still going to learn a lot. I did not plan on learning when I set out to code with AI. I just wanted to get things made. But you're going to learn a lot because as you're going to run into situations where either the model gets confused or isn't aware of the latest updates on a library or something like that. And so you're going to have to go and do your own research and learn a little bit about that. You don't have to learn everything. You don't have to totally learn how to code, but you're going to have to get at least familiar with it and how to talk about it and how to research the latest libraries and you're going to have to get good at that. What is really project management. I used to be a project manager, so that is what project management is you're doing a lot of research, you're learning, you're gathering tools, and you're sharing those with whatever model you're working with. So unfortunately, you're going to have to learn something. You're going to have to dive in and learn a little bit about whatever it is that you're trying to build. And one thing that you should think about when you're building is you probably don't fully understand what it is that you're trying to build. And Elon Musk talks about this. He talks about first principles, going back to first principles. It's really easy to get deep into a project where you're actually building something you don't need and not realize it until much later than you should. When Elon Musk talks about it, one of the things that he mentions is trying to streamline a process that shouldn't exist. If you can eliminate something, if you can eliminate a product or a process or a part of something that doesn't need to exist, that's way better than trying to improve that process or part. I've done that so many times in my life where I've streamlined a process and then later realized that process didn't need to exist. So when you're working on building a tool, it's really hard, but one of the skills that you're going to find yourself learning, and the sooner the better, is going back to first principles. What is it that I'm trying to do? Like, just the simplest notion of what it is that you're trying to build. Now, eventually, you're probably going to end up building something that's a lot more complex. But if you can go, like I mentioned that earlier when I was talking about adding a feature onto this tool, it's much better to just work on that one feature. What is this one thing that I'm trying to do? Rather than trying to dump that whole feature onto an existing product, what I had to do was go back to Gemini and ChatGPT and build out that one feature and figure out, okay, what is this one thing that I'm trying to do? Narrow it down to, okay, like specifically, what am I trying to do? And it turns out like this feature is all it does is it compares audio on the left channel and the right channel, and anything that's louder on one side, it ducks it down. And so it makes both sides the same, essentially. But figuring that out, narrowing it down to that one simple idea, took me a long time, a lot of iterating and beating my head against the wall. And it didn't need to take that long. If I had just kind of like taken a step back and thought about it, like, what is it that I'm trying to do? What is this one feature that I'm trying to build? And that it would have saved me a lot of time. And so I always try to remind myself that, and I fail, but I'm telling you so that hopefully it'll save you countless hours. And I'm trying to remind myself as well to, whenever you're building something, take a step back and think through, what really am I trying to build? What do I care about most? And often the models that you're using will get to where they're kind of distracted. They get off on tangents where they're building things that you didn't ask for. And sometimes your research, you'll get confused, and like you're having a conversation with Notebook LM and you start getting interested in different features. And sometimes that's good because you'll learn things about what you're trying to do that you didn't realize before, and you'll come up with ideas that help inform the design process. But at some point, you got to take a step back, and you'll have to do this over and over whenever you're building something. Always be taking a step back and looking at it and thinking, okay, what am I trying to do here? What is this really about? What am I trying to build? And again, that'll save you countless hours. And going back to these larger platforms like Lovable and Bolt, where they have a backend database, that's another reason why you want to build something outside of these first, because all of that iterative process where you're like learning what it is that you're actually trying to build, you don't want to spend that process in one of these platforms because it's going to cost you money and it doesn't need to. So like go through that ideation process. That, like, I know you think you have an idea and you get like way down the road towards building that idea, but the truth is you're still in the ideation process. Like most of the building process is ideation process, because you're like, at least when you're a vibe coder, if you were really well experienced with this and a really experienced project manager, then maybe that's not a problem that you're going to run into. But I am a project manager. I should know this stuff, and I still run into it over and over, where I realize down the road that I'm building something that I didn't need, or I'm not building what I really set out to build. So you constantly got to be reminding yourself to go back to the drawing board. And one kind of like feature, it's not really a feature, but it ends up being helpful. One feature of these like Gemini and ChatGPT and Perplexity is that their context is more limited, and so you'll run out of, like, you'll get to a really long conversation with one of these models, and it'll start getting slow and bogged down, and you'll have to start a new conversation anyway. And that forces you to go back and remind yourself what it is that you're trying to build. So one of the limitations of these smaller models, or these models that are built for shorter conversations and smaller like coding sessions, one of the limitations ends up being really helpful when you're in the building process, because it forces you to go back and reset. So again, I can't say enough. I can't say it enough. Code with these other models first, and then once you have something, you can then take it into one of these other platforms and build from there, build out a backend. All right, that is all I wanted to cover for tonight. Thanks for joining, and as always, I'm not going to schedule these out, at least not yet. I'll just do them as I have time and interest, but I will try to do a little bit better job of scheduling them the day of, so that you have at least a chance of joining, and drop any comments in the chat or underneath this video once it's posted, and I'll try to tackle them the next time that I jump on here. Let's see if there's any comments that I missed. You should also try making a video on new Google. Gravity ID. Yes, I will do that. I think it's similar to these other platforms, but I need to dive in and try it and see. I don't know anything about it yet, so I will do that. It's a good idea, and maybe that'll be my next video. So yeah, I'll see what I can learn. I don't know anything about it yet, so I won't have anything valuable to offer. But I'll poke around in there and see if I can